Dragon's Dogma 2 has a major issue, specifically surrounding the performance of the game. And before we get into that, I just want to say that as a content creator, I try to remain relatively transparent. It is so much easier just being myself in front of an audience and in front of a camera than it is to try to be anybody else. And with that said, when I make videos, I'm typically making videos because I'm excited for a game's release or because I'm just having so much fun playing a game that I want to share that experience with other players. And this is one of those moments where I have to sit back and kind of eat crow, be humbled for a moment, because I largely waved off everybody's concerns when it came to frame rate issues. A lot of games have faced this kind of stuff over the years, and I didn't really think it was something that was going to affect me because I play on PC. Lo and behold, it is going to affect me and many other players, and that's also going to reflect people's experience of the game going forward. And I can't just necessarily think about just myself because I'm making videos for you. So I have to kind of think about that. And this is one of those lessons that I had to kind of learn to realize that when there are major concerns out there from players, I should pay attention to those as well. And this is me doing that. So this video is more or less me just trying to warn people that are viewers of my channel that if frame rate issues or the issues that are impending for Dragon's Dogma 2 are something that you're afraid of, then you may want to withhold your pre-order or wait a few weeks before purchasing the game or watch other players play it because, well, it seems like it's going to be relatively staggering. So let's take a look at it. In a recent article from IGN written by Isaiah Colbert titled "Capcom is aware of Dragon's Dogma 2 frame rate issues on PC, looking into fixes," quote, "We are looking into ways to improve performance in the future." Isaiah writes, "Folks teeming with excitement to finally dive into Capcom's hotly anticipated fantasy action role-playing sequel Dragon's Dogma 2 on March 12th, that's a typo, it's March 22nd, may experience some inconsistent frame rate performance issues on PC." Responding to a query about frame rate problems from IGN, Capcom said in a statement that performance issues on PC may be linked to the heavy amount of CPU demand from NPCs in the game. Quote saying, "In Dragon's Dogma 2, a large amount of CPU usage is allocated to each character and dynamically calculates the impact of their physical presence in various environments. In certain situations where numerous characters appear simultaneously, the CPU usage can be very high and may affect frame rate. We are aware that in such situations, settings that can reduce GPU load may currently have limited effect. However, we are looking into ways to improve performance in the future." Whereas games like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth give players a performance or graphics mode option, prioritizing either a consistent frame rate or increased graphical thread count, as it were, Dragon's Dogma 2 only has one visual mode across all consoles. Speaking with Game Informer, director Hideki Atsuno clarified his statement about Dragon's Dogma 2 releasing with an uncapped frame rate for all consoles, saying, "We're aiming to go at around or higher than 30 FPS. And this is something that I should have immediately seen as a red flag, because the minute that I see that some of these console games don't get the option for either performance or graphic mode, that tells me that they're not really doing everything they can to be able to optimize the game fully for the players and make sure that they have the options at their disposal to play the game as the way they want to." And one of the things I've noticed as well is that this is kind of a historical thing when it comes to Capcom. Many of their games upon release do not perform very well, especially on PC, and as such, that causes a lot of headaches for a lot of players, but it is something that they do relatively address kind of quickly. My only problem is the language that was used in their initial response, which is, "We're looking into increasing the graphical performance in the future." I don't want to hear "in the future" for a game that's not even on the shelves yet. I want to hear "we're going to fix it immediately" when it's a game that's not even on the shelves yet. So this is one of the reasons why when I read this article and I saw Capcom's response, I thought to myself, players should know about this, because if they're saying "in the future," that could mean anytime. That could mean they could be working on it for a month or two, and if that's the case, there are going to be players that are going to pick this game up, not like or enjoy the performance that the game provides, and thus have their entire experience ruined with the game, where you may be better off not buying the game immediately, withdrawing your pre-order, and waiting for the game later, as most of us always should, because one, that is a lesson to these developers, to these studios, saying, we do not buy games that are not finished products on day one. And yeah, so I would suggest that if this is a major concern for you, I would probably wait a couple days at the very least. IGN continues with, although Capcom specifically addressed a fix for frame rate issues on PC, Some with early access copies here at IGN have experienced frame rate inconsistencies on PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X and S as well. According to IGN performance reviewer Michael Thompson, Dragon's Dogma 2 can be impacted across all formats by CPU and memory bandwidth demands. These can impact consoles and medium to lower end PCs far more. Areas such as Venworth are very demanding, even on the highest end machines and, in particular, the CPU. During his playthrough, Thompson noted that the Xbox Series S suffered the most with memory demands such as textures that would fail to load and become very low quality after roughly 10 minutes of open world exploration. In addition, Thompson lost saves a few times, returning to an earlier point in the title and even cause a game reset from the start. Dragon's Dogma 2 currently has high demands on hardware, with the Steam Deck struggling to run at playable rates, and even high-end machines of a RTX 4090 paired with an AMD 5800X3D CPU can drop into the 30s whilst in the denser populated towns. I am not Digital Foundry, nor am I Gamers Nexus, but what I will say is this: when I look at a game like Dragon's Dogma 2, I can tell that there's a lot of really complex CPU interactions going on inside of the game. Because think about it, with the way that the pawn system works and how dynamic that can be, and then also with how many emergent gameplay elements are in the game, whether that's random things that can just happen out in the wild with a random monster running into another one, or running into you, or running into a town, how NPCs approach you with quests and things like that. This is a little bit more complex than most games that we're used to, especially when it comes to just questing and open world exploration in general. But with that said, with the game struggling on a 4090 and a 5800X, that's not good. And that goes to show that the game just isn't well optimized. To be honest, this is something that we're relatively used to. We've seen this time and time again with some of these games where they're just not taking the time to put the final touches on making sure that the game, the final production of the game, is going to meet the expectations of the consumer. Quality is definitely a large part of that. Of course, we want great games, and of course, we want great games that play well, but more than anything, we need great games that work. And you can make a fantastic game, but if the game doesn't work, players aren't going to play it, and that initial experience of playing the game is going to ruin players' expectations for the game moving forward and their entire impressions of the game. And I think a really good example of this is something that we saw with Cyberpunk 2077. I didn't play the game for almost over a year until they made finally all of the rest of the fixes that they needed to. And even still, before I went back to it, I was still partially expecting it to be just like the experience that I had when I first bought the game. And that's just something that you're going to have happen. And it's something that these companies need to try to avoid. They need to take that extra time out. And I realize that they got money to make and they need to make that money. But at the same time, I need a good game and I need one that works. Isaiah continues by saying, Dragon's Dogma 2's frame rate issues were so rough for IGN senior editorial director Mark Medina that he had to switch from playing on PlayStation 5 to PC because he was getting motion sickness. It's one of those games where if you look up at the sky or down at the ground, the frame rate improves, Medina said. So if you look up at a cliff to fight goblins, and you're at 40 to 50 FPS, and then you turn your camera down at the world, and suddenly there's a quick drop in frames. It's disorienting. While Dragon's Dogma 2 may not run as well as it should on PlayStation 5, IGN editorial producer Mitchell Saltzman said that its performance issues were never a deal breaker for him. It's distracting at best and annoying at worst, and this game would unquestionably be improved if its performance was better, but it never robbed me from the thrilling moments of combat, nor did it take anything away from the exciting moments of exploration and discovery at the heart of the experience, Saltzman said. Likewise, IGN gameplay producer Ronnie Barrier said that although Dragon's Dogma 2's frame rate can be wildly inconsistent, it never looked jittery, or hampered on how much joy he found adventuring the game's good-looking landscapes. Sure, I would love it if it ran at a solid 60 FPS at all times, and I'm not here to make excuses for it. The performance in an action game should be consistent, even if it has to be a consistent 30 FPS. But any issues I have with the performance didn't distract from the adventure for me, Barrier said. Thankfully, Dragon's Dogma 2 is a bit more methodical than most action games, with very few mechanics that require strict timing, and I think that helps soften the blow as well. I think that this is going to be the general consensus of people's experiences while playing Dragon's Dogma 2, where they're going to recognize that yes, there is frame rate issues, there are performance problems, but at the same time, it's not impacting their gameplay. So they're largely going to shrug it off and just continue to play the game and recognize how great the game is underneath its flaws. But that's not how this should be. That's not a excuse for bad performance or poor optimization when a game is released. But since Dragon's Dogma 2 is a little bit more methodical, it's not like a lot of other action RPGs where frames are tied to the actual gameplay experience. You look at something like a Elden Ring or a Dark Souls game, and if the frame rates are bad, well, that literally could lead to you wasting time. You could completely lose a boss fight because of something that was completely out of your control. And that's the things that really drive us crazy. And luckily, that's not what this kind of game is. But with that said, that doesn't excuse bad performance. And if this is something that you think is going to impact your gameplay experience, and you think that this is going to give you a bad impression of the game, then I suggest waiting to buy. I suggest withdrawing your pre-order and just holding on until you see it improve. And if it doesn't, then it definitely wasn't. Well, that's not good. But when it does, surely it will, especially with how much money they put into it. They want it to do well. But when it does improve, that's when you go get it, because that shows these developers, these companies, that we aren't going to wait and just give you our money regardless. You need to fix this stuff before you give it to us. The final product needs to live up to our expectations. This is a AAA quality game made by one of the biggest companies in all of gaming. There is no excuse at all for this game to release in a sorry state. That's it. There's no need for us to have these kind of expectations. There's no need for us to try to be understanding. This is a AAA company. This is Capcom. And this is embarrassing when you're releasing a game that is playing as shoddy as this game apparently is. So I'm still looking forward to the game. I'm still going to be playing the game. And I'm going to play it in front of you so you guys can see just how bad it is, if it is that bad, and we'll go from there. But with that said, I would give it a couple days, especially with how many different people are coming out and talking about this. I watched Force Gaming's review of the game, and he specifically talked about it for a little bit, and he said, especially when you're in towns with a lot of different NPCs, the game really chugs. And I know he has a high roller rig. I got a big rig. There's no way that this game should be chunking on my PC. And it sounds like with a lot of the hardware options that many different people have used, it still is anyway. And again, there's really just no excuse for that. So, yeah. I hope that you guys derived some value from this video. I'm glad I could provide this information to you. And on top of that, from here on and in the future, I'm going to try to do my best to try to include some players' misgivings when it comes to these games, some worries and things like that, because, well, they do hold credence, and I do need to pay attention to that kind of stuff. So, yeah. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Drop a comment down below, like the video, share it to other friends, make sure other people know about this. And yeah, that's all I got. Stay cool, stay righteous, stay safe, and you guys can catch me live probably right after this video goes live. Peace.
Family.